Assalamu alaikum. Greetings. It's my pleasure to be here to discuss cybersecurity in the realm of digital Pakistan. Greetings, my name is Zane Blomgren, and today I'll start with a brief introduction of myself. We'll talk about what are we up against, what are some of the cybersecurity threats that we're facing today, and how does it manifest itself. Based on this, we'll look at what foundational steps have proven successful in working against these cyber threats. Based on learning from the foundational controls, we'll talk about a practical way to put them in motion briefly, and there we'll focus on the PCI standard. I would normally transition into a period of questions and answers, but today I will leave you with some resources and people to contact to continue this conversation. So, as I said, I'm Zane Blomgren. It's a pleasure to be here. I spent more than 20 years as a cybersecurity practitioner in a variety of capacities. I've been an engineer on staff. I've been tasked with pre-sales engineering and design and application design prior to the implementation of the controls. I've also worked in a post-sales capacity to help implement these solutions for a variety of organizations. And they could be in banking, they might be in government, or even industrial control systems. So I've worked with manufacturing or oil and gas in different sectors. So we have an opportunity to discuss possibly some of those. I am based in the United States, but I have had the privilege of working globally, implementing these solutions for a variety of organizations. I like to share something personal, and with that, I will say I have been blessed to be married quite joyfully, and I have 5 children who keep me very, very busy, as you might imagine. So let's talk a little bit about what we are up against. And I would say, let's do it in the context of what are the headlines? We see them, they're present. So are the headlines, are they all that bad? And so when we're looking at the headlines and what's out there, we might look at the recent events such as the SWIFT network being used within a breach. And I think this is something that can be fairly top of mind for many people. We might talk about the ransomware, right? So within the ransomware side, a lot of activity is happening, which can impact organizations, can shut them down, and you're faced with the option of pay or try to recover from it, or try to avoid the ransomware to begin with. And that's what we're going to focus on here today, which is how do we avoid some of these other breaches that we've seen. I think within this group, you might think about the jackpotting, off of the ATMs. But maybe most prevalent is in this time of global pandemic and all of the challenges that we face, we've also seen a rise, a significant rise in the attacks in the banking industry, spiking more than 200% since the onset of COVID-19. Okay, so we talked about, are they all that bad? And instead of getting into the costs, dollar per credit card, or how much the total loss was, I wanted to step back because there are a million statistics that you can use to figure out, what is the overall cost of these. But instead, as leaders, I try to, talk about, well, what are the costs for your business and how might you analyze those things? So there will be a financial cost. Without a doubt, there's a financial cost to these breaches. There'll be a cost that could be around technical. So you're going to have to bring people in to solve the problem, or you're going to be paying overtime. You might have to purchase additional technologies as a part of this breach. There's a myriad of costs that are going to go along with that. And you have a customer focus. So you may have to refund or cover their losses. To keep them confident, you may have to provide gifts, or you may have to do monitoring. When I say gifts, I'm talking about within something to placate or appease these customers. And then you may have to think about regulatory. So there could be fines that come directly as a result of these breaches. And not listed, but one I often think of is what about cybersecurity insurance? You know, the insurance that you may pay to help offset or these losses. The breaches could be a direct result or a direct impact on these costs. Reputation, right? We have a reputation to protect as an organization, as a business. We have teams of people that work hard to build a good reputation and a good presence. So what's going to happen there? New customers are going to look and say, oh, there was a breach, there was a problem. Is this where I want to go put my trust? And existing customers may be lured away to other places where they might feel more confident because of the reputation that's at stake. Stakeholders. So the easy one is, the investors. The investors are probably going to have a great deal of interest in the financial status, but also the employees. Is this a place that I want to work? Is this a place that I want to be? Is this where I belong, right? So you as a leader also are going to have impact or a cost potentially. And we talked about tenure on this. And tenure is going to go not just in the ability to keep your job, and I think about it more of, can you, in the design profession, be impactful? Are you going to have the longevity that you can put in place these things that are going to be helpful, right? So that's where tenure can come into play. And so these are the costs that you might look at within that capacity. So there are some real risks and some real costs. So what controls have proven successful? And I oftentimes think, avoid chasing these low return activities. And so what might those look like? And if we take the broad landscape of controls that are available out there, effective security starts with foundational controls. And I hope this is something that you have heard regularly. I hope it's something that you kind of hold very close, because the truth weighs out in this area. So when we start looking at the foundational controls, there's nothing super exciting necessarily about them in terms of a shiny object. They are dealing with things like vulnerability management, collecting your logs centrally so that you have visibility. And we're going to see more of these as we progress through. Now, you don't want to stop at just the foundational controls. You want to continue to build on to these controls, and they bring high value. And so within these, you've got your fundamental controls. What I really like about this particular slide is that it shows that there's a building. And if you go into fundamental controls, as you see, these advanced controls, without first laying that foundation, you're not going to have the data that's needed on the higher levels, right? So you won't be able to do these kind of analytics without the data that came out of the first level and out of the second level. And what we notice about these controls is that the lower controls, the foundational ones, cost less. They require lower maturity to start. As the maturity increases, you're able to continue up. The other piece that I've noticed about the top tier is that within the top tier, the controls become very expensive if you have not taken care of the basic foundational and fundamental controls. So I like to think about, what is my return? We talk about these foundational controls. Well, what type of return would I get on them? It's a fairly common statistic or number that about 91% of the attacks that would go on would be stopped. So let's explore a little bit further and start to transition from these controls and look at it through one lens that can be very helpful through CIS, or Center for Internet Security, top 20 critical security controls. And so without getting into all 20, I want to focus on those kind of basic controls that we've already talked about. And as we begin looking at the top 20, what's handy about this is that you'll notice that it maps to global regulations or guidelines or control frameworks. And so what's convenient about that is that you may be able to put this through the Singapore Monetary Authority, right? So answering questions there, or ISO 27001, or PCI. And so the key piece is all of these regulations and best practices have the similar types of controls in place, and there are all these foundational controls that we see. Let's take this a little bit further. And so when we start looking at hardware asset and software assets, really what we're trying to find out is, what are we protecting? If we don't know what's out there, we don't know how to protect it. Some of the attacks that I respond to and work with organizations are around rogue devices that weren't aware, or different pieces of software that had been installed. Or how do you know what you need to patch if you don't know your vulnerabilities? So that's one of the additional controls that we start seeing this builds on. And then configuration assessment. So if we're looking at being able to secure these, there are some basics in just turn off unused services. Don't use SMBv1. And if you don't know that that is present on the network, or what that is, know that it's a high risk situation that these controls would point out. So now you begin to close off these attacks from different sectors. And so let's translate these into some technologies. And then remember, when we're talking about that kind of 91%. So the tools that you will typically see will be around asset management, or log management, or integrity monitoring. Vulnerability management would be another area, and is, of course, probably one of the high value ones would be around configuration management. Am I built securely? Can I measure that? And so then taking that 91%, if we were to look across there, 91% of the controls would cover 91% of these breaches. But the other part that's really key is that, notice the cost of that is only 12% of the budget versus 88%, which is used for other controls. So we're getting one of the highest values on these with some of the lowest spend within this, right? So it's kind of clear and fairly compelling, hopefully, that the number one investment that you could make within cybersecurity will be around these controls. So for your organization, begin looking at these and seeing, are we mapping to this? Are the items that I'm funding, or that I'm approving, or that I'm trying to implement, do they map to this? If they don't meet those controls, those basic foundational controls, and money is going elsewhere, think seriously about whether or not that's going to be the best value and the best investment. And so as we begin to look a little bit in how we would apply it, before we get into maybe PCI, let's do a little bit of a recap. So hopefully we see the compelling reason, what return do I get for doing these controls? Hopefully that shows very strong in that, closing the exposure. And you identify, the integrity drift. Are you built, the way that you were intending to? You're getting proactive IT management, and there you're also getting reduced IT expenses by doing this. And then when you start getting into doing these foundational, you're solving regulatory compliance. So I would assert, do good security, and you'll generally hit very good marks on regulatory. The other benefit that you would see in this traditionally would be around the mean time to detect. So somewhere within the 1 day, is the target. So as we bring this kind of to conclusion, I like to look at the controls that we've talked about within the lens of a value area, which in this case would be PCI compliance. From a practical application, let's look at PCI. Briefly, PCI applies to any organization that stores, processes, transmits the cardholder data, and they will be part of the PCI standard. Okay, and then this is including not just the credit card number, but the PAN data, the cardholder name, and other relevant sensitive information. So the PCI ecosystem, I think, is really good to understand, and this can be for a variety of different sectors, spanning from retail and finance, banking, or healthcare, and pieces like this. And then you have your payment vendors, which layer on and acquire and do the get the information. You get your acquirers and issuers. So these are oftentimes going to be banks or organizations like Global Payments. And then from there, you're going to see the processors. And then finally, at the top, you're going to have the card brands, right? Your Visa, et cetera. And so this is kind of the ecosystem that we're playing within. So as we bring this to kind of conclusion, what I like to point out is that you have your digital dozen, as it's oftentimes referred to. And having gone through the PCI exercise from some of the earliest days, if you look back to the requirements or the foundational controls, you're going to see implement things like strong access control measures. And these are going to map to the foundational controls. Can you build and maintain a secure network and set of systems? How are you going to be able to prove that? How are you going to be able to implement this? And so as you go through the journey to implement these security controls, know that you're going to be able to have a direct tie over to things such as PCI compliance. So with that, I wish to thank you. I would love to take questions, and I look forward to a day when we can be together, when we can share our ideas interactively. Until this time, we've provided some information for contacts, and I would encourage you to reach out to these organizations with your needs. We would love to be able to help and to serve you. In closing, I intentionally made this focus non-vendor related. I wanted this to be educational for you. I do work for an organization. I would encourage you to look potentially at Tripwire. They have given me the privilege of working with organizations globally for many years. So maybe you'll consider looking at Tripwire to meet your needs. And with that, I wish to say thank you, and I wish you all the safety.